The dining hall at the Oceanic Military Base buzzed with the usual evening chatter. Officers in crisp uniforms sat around polished tables, discussing missions and sharing stories from their latest deployments. The clinking of silverware against plates created a steady rhythm that had become as familiar as breathing to everyone who worked there. Maria Santos moved between the tables with practiced grace, her server's uniform clean and pressed, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She carried herself with quiet confidence, refilling water glasses and taking orders with a warm smile that put even the most stressed officers at ease. To everyone in that room, she was simply Maria, the friendly server who had been working at the base for the past 8 months. "Excuse me, miss," called out Lieutenant Johnson. "A young pilot fresh from training. Could I get some more coffee when you have a moment?" Maria nodded politely. "Of course, sir. Regular or decaf?" "Regular, please. Long night ahead of us," he replied, not really looking at her as he continued his conversation with his fellow pilots about their upcoming training exercises. This was Maria's world now. She blended into the background, invisible in the way that service workers often are to those they serve. The officers talked freely around her, discussing everything from training schedules to personal problems, never thinking twice about the quiet woman who ensured their meals were served hot and their glasses stayed full. What they didn't know was that Maria heard everything. Every conversation about security protocols, every mention of training exercises, every casual comment about base operations. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to listen while appearing completely focused on her work. Her memory was sharp, cataloging details that would have impressed the most seasoned intelligence officers. As she poured Lieutenant Johnson's coffee, she overheard him talking about the new simulation software they were testing. "The whole system crashed yesterday during our mock dogfight," he was saying to his companion. "Took the tech guys 3 hours to get us back online." Maria's hand remained steady as she filled his cup, but her mind was already analyzing the information. Software vulnerabilities, training delays, technical difficulties, all potential security concerns that someone with the right training would find very interesting. "Thank you," Lieutenant Johnson said absently, still not really seeing her. "You're welcome," Maria replied softly, moving on to the next table. At Table 7, Commander Roberts was discussing the upcoming joint training exercise with the Allied forces. "We're expecting delegates from 5 different countries," he was telling his dinner companion. "Security's going to be tight. Admiral Harrison wants everything perfect for this one." Maria cleaned the empty plates from a nearby table, her movements slow and deliberate to avoid drawing attention while she listened. The joint exercise was big news on the base, though most of the details were classified. Hearing about it from the officers gave her insights that weren't available in any official briefings. She had been working at the base long enough to recognize patterns. She knew which officers were stressed about upcoming missions, which ones were dealing with personal problems, and which ones might be vulnerable to outside influences. She had watched relationships form and dissolve, seen careers rise and fall, and observed the complex social dynamics that governed military life. What struck her most was how human they all were. Behind the uniforms and ranks were people with fears, hopes, and weaknesses just like everyone else. Lieutenant Johnson worried about disappointing his father, a decorated war hero. Commander Roberts struggled with the demands of his job and his family life. Captain Martinez dealt with chronic pain from an old injury, but refused to let it show. These weren't just observations for Maria. They were data points in a larger picture she had been building since her arrival at the base. Every conversation she overheard, every interaction she witnessed, every detail she noticed was carefully catalogued in her mind. As the evening wore on, the dining hall began to empty. The officers finished their meals and headed back to their quarters or night duties, leaving behind the usual collection of empty plates and forgotten conversations. Maria continued her work, cleaning tables and resetting them for the next day. "Another busy night," commented Janet, the head cook, as she emerged from the kitchen. "You holding up okay?" "Just fine," Maria replied, stacking plates with practiced efficiency. "Same as always." Janet studied her with the kind of look that came from years of reading people. "You know, you're different from the other servers we've had. Most of them are chattier, more, I don't know, more present somehow. You're always so focused." Maria paused in her work, meeting Janet's eyes for a moment. "I just take the job seriously." "That's good," Janet said. "But don't forget to live a little too. All work and no play, you know." After Janet returned to the kitchen, Maria continued cleaning, but the conversation lingered in her mind. It wasn't the first time someone had commented on her behavior. She had worked hard to blend in, but perhaps her focus was more noticeable than she had thought. The truth was that Maria Santos wasn't just focused on her job as a server. She was focused on her real job, the one that had brought her to this base in the first place. The one that required her to be invisible while seeing everything, to be trustworthy while harboring secrets, to be ordinary while being anything but. As she wiped down the last table of the evening, Maria allowed herself a moment to think about her real life, the one that existed before she became a server at the Oceanic military base. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 8 months since she had walked through the base gates for the first time, carrying falsified employment documents and a carefully constructed background story. The transition hadn't been easy. Going from her previous life to serving meals and cleaning tables required a complete adjustment of her mindset and expectations. But she had done it because the mission required it, and the mission always came first. Tomorrow would bring another day of the same routine. She would arrive early, help prepare for breakfast service, and spend the day moving invisibly through the dining hall while some of the military's most sensitive conversations happened around her. She would smile politely, refill water glasses, and clean tables while gathering intelligence that very few people in the world had access to. But tonight, as she hung up her apron and prepared to return to her small apartment off the base, Maria allowed herself to wonder how much longer this assignment would last, how much longer she could maintain her cover while gathering the information her real employers needed. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that tomorrow would bring an event that would shatter her carefully maintained anonymity and reveal truths that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. All she knew was that she had a job to do, and she would continue doing it until she received orders otherwise. As Maria locked up the dining hall and headed into the night, the base around her settled into its evening routine. Guards made their rounds, night shift personnel took their positions, and most of the base's inhabitants prepared for sleep. None of them suspected that the quiet server who had served their dinner was anything more than what she appeared to be. But appearances, as they would soon learn, could be very deceiving indeed. The emergency alarm shattered the peaceful morning routine at exactly 6:47 a.m. Maria was in the kitchen preparing for breakfast service when the piercing sound filled the air, followed immediately by the base-wide announcement system crackling to life. "All personnel report to designated emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The kitchen staff froze, looking at each other with confusion and growing concern. Emergency drills were scheduled and announced in advance. Real emergencies were something else entirely. "What do you think it is?" whispered Janet, her face pale with worry. Before anyone could answer, the sound of running footsteps echoed through the corridors outside. Orders were being shouted, and the organized chaos of military emergency response was rapidly taking shape throughout the base. Maria felt her pulse quicken, but not from fear like the others around her. Her training kicked in automatically, and she began mentally cataloging everything she was seeing and hearing. This could be the kind of situation her real employers would want detailed information about. "Everyone stay calm," she said to the kitchen staff, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Let's follow protocol and head to the designated safe area." As they filed out of the kitchen, Maria caught fragments of conversations from the officers and personnel hurrying past. Words like breach, unknown aircraft, and possible infiltration painted a picture of serious security concerns. The designated safe area for civilian staff was the base's main conference hall, a large room that could accommodate everyone who wasn't directly involved in emergency response. As Maria and the kitchen staff arrived, they found it already filling with other support personnel, family members, and off-duty staff. The mood in the room was tense but controlled. These were people who lived and worked on a military base, so they understood that emergencies were possible, even if they weren't directly involved in handling them. Still, the uncertainty was palpable. Maria positioned herself near a group of administrative staff who often had access to sensitive information. If she was going to be stuck in this room, she might as well use the time productively. "Do you know what's happening?" one of the clerks was asking another. "I heard it might be a security breach in the communications center," came the reply. "Someone said they detected unauthorized access to classified systems." Maria's attention sharpened. A breach in communications would be extremely serious, the kind of incident that could have far-reaching consequences for base security and operations. 20 minutes passed before Commander Roberts entered the hall, his face grim but composed. The room immediately quieted as everyone turned to hear what he had to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "we've experienced a serious security incident. Our cybersecurity team detected an attempted breach of our classified communications network early this morning." A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Cyber attacks on military installations were everyone's worst nightmare. "The good news is that our security systems worked as designed," Commander Roberts continued. "The breach was detected and contained quickly. However, we're treating this as a potential precursor to a larger attack." Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. If there had been a cyber attack, it was possible that her own activities had been compromised. Had someone detected her intelligence gathering? Was her cover blown? "As a precautionary measure, we're implementing enhanced security protocols immediately," the commander continued. "All personnel will undergo additional security screening over the next 48 hours. We're also restricting access to sensitive areas and implementing new identification procedures." The enhanced security screening was definitely a problem. Maria's false identity was good, but it wasn't designed to withstand the kind of thorough investigation that would accompany a serious security incident. She needed to find a way to contact her handlers and request extraction. After Commander Roberts finished his briefing and left, the room erupted in nervous conversation. People were worried about the security breach, about the new restrictions, and about what this might mean for their jobs and families. Maria excused herself and headed toward the restrooms, hoping to find a private moment to think through her options. But as she walked down the corridor, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Security personnel were posted at intervals throughout the building, and they weren't just standing guard. They were checking identification, asking questions, and clearly implementing the enhanced security protocols that Commander Roberts had mentioned. More troubling, she recognized one of the security officers. Agent Thompson from Military Intelligence, someone she had seen in classified briefings during her real career. If he was here, it meant this incident was being taken very seriously indeed. Maria forced herself to walk normally, to appear calm and unconcerned like any other civilian employee would be during a security incident. But inside, her mind was racing through contingency plans and escape routes. She made it to the restroom without incident. But as she stood at the mirror, she realized that her time as Maria Santos, server, was probably coming to an end. The question was whether she could maintain her cover long enough to complete her mission, or whether she would need to abandon it to avoid capture. When she returned to the conference hall, she found the atmosphere had changed. Security personnel had arrived and were beginning to process everyone for the enhanced screening. They had set up tables and were calling people forward one by one to verify their identities and ask questions about their activities. "Kitchen staff," called out one of the officers, "please form a line for processing." Maria joined Janet and the other kitchen workers, her heart pounding but her expression calm. As they waited, she listened to the questions being asked and the responses being given. Most of it was routine, but she could tell the officers were being thorough. When her turn came, Maria approached the table with what she hoped was the right mixture of concern and cooperation that any innocent employee would show. "Name?" asked the officer, not looking up from his paperwork. "Maria Santos," she replied, handing over her identification card. The officer scanned the card and typed something into his computer. Maria held her breath, knowing that this was the moment when her cover would either hold or crumble. "How long have you worked on the base?" he asked. 8 months, Maria answered. "I started in March." "Any unusual activities or observations in the past few weeks? Anyone asking questions about base operations? Anyone you didn't recognize?" This was a standard security question, but Maria knew her answer could be crucial. "Nothing unusual," she said. "Just the normal routine in the dining hall." The officer made a note and looked up at her for the first time. For a moment, Maria thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, but then he handed back her identification. "You can return to your normal duties once the all-clear is given," he said. "Report any unusual activities immediately." "Of course," Maria replied, taking her ID and stepping away from the table. As she walked back to where the kitchen staff was waiting, Maria felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had passed the initial screening, but she knew this was just the beginning. The enhanced security protocols would continue for days, possibly weeks, and each interaction would be another test of her cover. The all-clear came 2 hours later, and everyone was released to return to their normal duties. But as Maria walked back toward the kitchen, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The atmosphere on the base was different now, more tense and watchful. In the kitchen, Janet was clearly shaken by the morning's events. "I've never seen anything like that," she said as they began preparing a late breakfast service. "Do you think we're safe here?" "The commander said they contained the breach," Maria replied, focusing on her food preparation to avoid showing her own nervousness. "I'm sure they know what they're doing." But as the day wore on, Maria became increasingly aware that she was being watched. Not obviously, and not by everyone, but there were subtle signs that someone was paying attention to her activities. A security guard who seemed to be in the dining hall more often than usual. An officer who made eye contact a little too frequently. A maintenance worker who appeared to be taking longer than necessary to fix things. By evening, Maria had made her decision. She needed to contact her handlers and request immediate extraction. Her cover might still be intact, but the risk was becoming too high to continue the mission. The problem was that all her normal communication methods were potentially compromised. If there had been a cyber attack, the base's communications networks would be under intense scrutiny. Any unusual signals or transmissions would be detected immediately. As she finished her shift and prepared to leave for the day, Maria knew she was facing the most dangerous part of her assignment. Getting out would require all her training and more than a little luck. But first, she needed to survive one more night as Maria Santos, the server who was just trying to do her job in the middle of a security crisis that she knew far more about than anyone suspected. The dining hall was unusually quiet the next evening. The security incident had left everyone on edge, and conversations were more subdued than usual. Maria moved through her routine, but she could feel the weight of surveillance pressing down on her like a physical presence. She had spent the entire day trying to figure out how to contact her handlers without using any of the compromised communication networks. Every option seemed to carry unacceptable risks, and time was running out. The enhanced security protocols were scheduled to intensify over the next few days, and she doubted her cover would survive much more scrutiny. As she refilled water glasses at the officers' table, Maria overheard a conversation that stopped her cold. "The investigation team arrives tomorrow morning," Commander Roberts was saying to his dinner companion. "Admiral Harrison wants this handled at the highest levels." Admiral Harrison. Maria felt her blood turn to ice. She knew that name from her real life, from classified briefings and high-level intelligence meetings. If Admiral Harrison was involved, this wasn't just a routine security incident. This was something much bigger. "They're bringing in cyber forensic specialists from the Capitol," Roberts continued. "They'll be going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Every communication, every access log, every person who's been on this base in the past year. Every person who's been on this base in the past year." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she set down the water pitcher. A thorough investigation would definitely uncover her real identity, no matter how good her cover was. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the sound of her name being called. "Maria Santos, please report to the main conference room immediately." The announcement over the base's public address system cut through the dining hall's quiet conversations like a blade. Every head in the room turned to look at her, and Maria felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her as she stood frozen by the officers' table. Her mind raced through possibilities. This could be routine, just another part of the enhanced security screening. Or it could mean that someone had discovered her real identity. Either way, she had no choice but to respond. "I need to go," she said quietly to Janet, who was standing nearby with a look of concern on her face. "Do you want me to come with you?" Janet offered. "No, I'm sure it's fine," Maria replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. The walk to the conference room felt like the longest journey of her life. Security personnel nodded to her as she passed, and she couldn't tell if they were being polite or making sure she didn't try to run. When she reached the conference room, Maria found it set up differently than it had been during the emergency briefing. A single table sat in the center of the room, with 3 chairs on one side and one on the other. 3 people in military uniforms were already seated, their expressions serious but not hostile. "Please have a seat," said the woman in the center, a colonel whose name badge read Martinez. "We appreciate you coming so quickly." Maria sat down, her hands folded calmly in her lap, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "How can I help you?" "We're conducting follow-up interviews related to the security incident," Colonel Martinez explained. "We understand you've been working in the dining hall for several months, so you've had the opportunity to observe a lot of the base's daily operations." "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied carefully. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Any conversations that seemed out of place? Any personnel behaving differently than normal?" These were the same types of questions she'd been asked during the initial screening, but something about the way they were being presented felt different. More focused, more specific. "Nothing that seemed unusual to me," Maria answered. "Everyone seemed concerned about the security incident, but that's understandable." Colonel Martinez made a note on the paper in front of her. "What about before the incident? Any unusual activities or conversations?" Maria shook her head. "Just the normal daily routine. Officers discussing training exercises, administrative matters, personal conversations." The colonel exchanged a glance with her companions, and Maria caught something in that look that made her even more nervous. It was the kind of look that passed between people who knew more than they were saying. "Maria," Colonel Martinez said, leaning forward slightly, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you ever worked in any capacity other than food service?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria felt every muscle in her body tense, but she forced herself to remain calm and appear confused by the question. "I don't understand," she said. "I've worked in restaurants and cafeterias most of my adult life. That's why I was hired here." "What about military experience? Intelligence work? Government service of any kind?" "No, nothing like that," Maria replied, maintaining eye contact while lying with the skill that came from years of training. The colonel studied her for a long moment, then nodded to one of her companions. The man, a major whose name badge read Stevens, pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be documents. "Your background check shows employment at several restaurants over the past 5 years," Major Stevens said. "But there are some gaps in your employment history that we'd like you to clarify." This was dangerous territory. Maria's cover story had been carefully constructed, but no false identity was perfect. "I took some time off between jobs," she said. "Personal reasons, family issues." "For 6 months last year?" Stevens pressed. "That's a significant gap." "My mother was ill," Maria replied, falling back on one of the backup explanations that had been built into her cover story. "I had to care for her before she passed away." It was a lie. But it was a lie that would be difficult to disprove quickly, and it had the added benefit of being the kind of personal tragedy that people were reluctant to probe too deeply. Colonel Martinez made another note. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, and Maria thought she detected genuine sympathy in her voice. "Just a few more questions, and then you can return to your duties." But before the colonel could continue, the conference room door opened, and Maria's world shifted on its axis. Admiral Harrison walked into the room. Maria had seen him before, of course, but only in classified briefings and high-level intelligence meetings. He was a man who commanded respect just by walking into a room, tall and imposing with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. What terrified Maria was that he might recognize her from those previous meetings. Her appearance had been altered for this assignment, and she had been careful to stay in the background during briefings, but Admiral Harrison had a reputation for remembering faces. "Colonel Martinez," the Admiral said, taking a seat at the table. "How are we progressing with the interviews?" "Just finishing up with Ms. Santos, sir," the Colonel replied. Admiral Harrison turned his attention to Maria, and she felt as if she were being examined under a microscope. For several seconds, he studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Ms. Santos," he said finally, "have we met before?" The question was casual, almost conversational, but Maria knew it was anything but. This was the moment when her cover would either hold or completely collapse. "I don't believe so, sir," she answered, meeting his gaze directly. "I would remember meeting an admiral." Admiral Harrison continued to study her, and Maria could practically see the wheels turning in his mind. Then, suddenly, his expression changed, not to recognition, but to something else, something that looked almost like respect. "What's your call sign, Lieutenant?" he asked quietly. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. "Call sign, Lieutenant!" He knew. The room fell completely silent. Colonel Martinez and Major Stevens looked confused, but Admiral Harrison's eyes never left Maria's face. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Maria considered continuing to deny everything, but she could see in the Admiral's eyes that he knew exactly who she was, and there was no point in maintaining a cover that had already been blown. Slowly, Maria straightened in her chair, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that hadn't been there moments before. "Phoenix, sir," she said. "Lieutenant Commander Maria Elena Vasquez, Naval Intelligence." The reaction in the room was immediate and dramatic. Colonel Martinez and Major Stevens stared at her in shock, their minds clearly struggling to reconcile the server they thought they knew with the high-ranking intelligence officer who had just revealed herself. Admiral Harrison smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I thought I recognized you from the briefings on the Meridian operation. You've changed your appearance quite a bit." "The assignment required it, sir," Maria replied, falling back into the formal patterns of military communication. "Stand down, Lieutenant Commander," Admiral Harrison said. "Your assignment is complete." Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by confusion. "Sir, with respect, I was under the impression that my mission was ongoing." "It was," the Admiral confirmed. "Until yesterday's security incident. The cyber attack wasn't random, Lieutenant Commander. It was specifically designed to smoke out intelligence operatives who might be embedded on this base." The pieces suddenly fell into place. The timing of the attack, the enhanced security protocols, the investigation team that was supposed to arrive. It had all been a carefully orchestrated operation to identify potential security threats. "You were testing me?" Maria asked. "We were testing everyone," Admiral Harrison replied. "But you passed with flying colors. Your cover held under pressure, your operational security was exemplary, and you maintained your mission focus even when faced with potential exposure." Colonel Martinez finally found her voice. "Sir, I'm having trouble understanding. Are you saying that she's been conducting an intelligence operation on our base?" "A friendly intelligence operation, Colonel," Admiral Harrison explained. "Lieutenant Commander Vasquez has been conducting a security assessment, testing our personnel's operational security practices, and identifying potential vulnerabilities." "You mean she's been spying on us?" Major Stevens asked, his voice carrying a mixture of outrage and admiration. "She's been protecting us," Admiral Harrison corrected. "The intelligence she's gathered over the past 8 months has helped us identify several security concerns that we're now addressing. Her work may have prevented a real enemy from successfully infiltrating this base." As the full implications of what had happened sank in, Maria felt the weight of 8 months of constant vigilance and careful acting finally lift from her shoulders. She had successfully completed one of the most challenging assignments of her career, and she had done it so well that even experienced military personnel had been completely fooled. "The question now," Admiral Harrison continued, "is what happens next. Your performance on this assignment has been noted at the highest levels, Lieutenant Commander. There are other bases, other security concerns that could benefit from your particular skills." Maria considered this for a moment. 8 months of living a double life had been exhausting, but it had also been oddly satisfying. She had made a real difference, had helped protect the people she had come to care about during her time as their server. "I serve at the pleasure of naval intelligence, sir," she said finally. Admiral Harrison nodded approvingly. "Good answer. But first, I think you've earned some leave. Real leave where you can be yourself instead of playing a role." As Maria stood to leave the conference room, she thought about the people in the dining hall who were probably still wondering what had happened to their quiet server. Janet would be worried, and Lieutenant Johnson would probably never know that the woman who had poured his coffee for 8 months was actually higher ranking than he was. But that was the nature of intelligence work. The most successful operations were the ones that nobody ever knew about, carried out by people who were willing to disappear into roles that required them to be invisible while making a real difference. As Admiral Harrison had said, she was Phoenix. And like the mythical bird, she had the ability to become someone completely different when the mission required it, only to rise again as her true self when the assignment was complete. The dining hall would have a new server soon, and life on the base would continue as normal. But it would be a little bit safer because of the quiet woman who had served their meals while secretly watching over them all.